Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of comics like Hitman, Mythic, and the upcoming Dead Rabbit. It's John McCrea. Thanks for coming on, John.
Pleasure, David. Happy to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me on.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for Dead Rabbit. I actually just reread Hitman, so this is all very perfect for me. But I want to start by going really far back because I learned something I was really surprised by that maybe I shouldn't have been surprised by. But so like I said, I just reread Hitman and I was reading some stuff, reading some interviews in prep for this conversation. And I didn't realize that you and Garth actually went to secondary school together.
Yeah, that's right.
That's wild.
Right. Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, I'm sure it's not that uncommon that, people grow up together. The mutual love of comics draws them together, etc. But with Garth and me, it was a little different because he was in my younger brother's year at school. Mm-hmm. He was about 3, maybe even 4 years below me, I think. So I was aware of him because he was not friends with my brother, but he knew him. He's an acquaintance. Mm-hmm. So I knew that he existed and he knew I existed. And we both knew that we were into comics. I was more into superhero stuff. And though I read anything, mm-hmm. and Garth, of course, leaned much more towards the war comics. So, and it wasn't until I opened a comic shop in Belfast, mm-hmm. Belfast's first comic shop, Dark Horizons, with another school friend of mine, Fred, that Garth started to come into the shop to buy his comics. Mm-hmm. And this was when I was I think the shop started when I was about 20 and ran till it ran on for a while, but I kind of left the shop after I became professional. Mm-hmm. But Garth would come in and buy stuff off me, and after a while he pitched an idea for something for a comic called Troubled Souls to me. Most people who came into my shop who had aspirations to write would do this because they knew that I A, drew comics, and B, had started getting some work. I had done a couple of little jobs for various small publishing houses in the UK, and I'd got a Future Shock with 2000 AD printed, and from that I had got a couple of short G.I. Joe. In the UK, G.I. Joe was called Action Force, mm-hmm. for whatever reason, and I got a couple of G.I. Joe stories, Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, so pretty cool characters to draw. But people knew that, they came into my shop, they knew that I was doing that. So I was always getting people pitching me ideas, hey, if I write this, you could draw it, blah, blah, blah. And so when Garth had this idea for Troubled Souls, there was a comic that was being put out by Fleetway, the publishers of 2000 AD, mm-hmm. called Crisis, which was a political comic. It was the sort of late 80s, and the whole idea of comics growing up had really taken a hold. And Crisis was Fleetway's answer to that. It was an anthology book which dealt with third world debt and environmental problems and all these sorts of issues. And it started out really well, and then it started to kind of sag a bit, the sales. Mm-hmm. And they had put out a little message saying who out there, we're looking for submissions for new cool ideas for Crisis. And Garth came into the shop and said, we're both Northern Irish creators. We could do a story about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, mm-hmm. and how it affects people and all that. And I was like, yeah, that sounds interesting. But I kind of didn't think much of it, because obviously Garth was completely untested, and so was I, mm-hmm. really, and not for a big thing like that. So Garth sent off his proposal, and the next thing I knew, we were being flown over to London to be interviewed by the Fleetway guys, Steve McManus and Igor Goldkind, and they interviewed us just to see if we were actually up to it, mm-hmm. and weren't just a couple of lunatics, which obviously in comics you run into a few of those. So
sure.
Anyway, we kind of managed to persuade them. Garth managed to persuade them that he could write it, from the proposal. And they asked me whether the trend at the time was for fully painted comics, because of guys like Glenn Fabry and Simon Bisley and all those sorts of dudes. And over in the States, you had Kent Williams and Bill Sienkiewicz and John J. Muthal doing painted stuff. And so there was this big trend for painted comics, and I had never painted in my life because all I wanted to do was draw Spider-Man.
Right.
Black and white comics and have somebody else color it. So I'd never picked up a paintbrush in my life, much to the irritation of my art college and teachers at school. So they said to me, can you paint 96 pages of full color artwork? I mean, they knew I could draw okay because they'd had given me a future shock. And I just looked them straight in the eye and lied completely and said, yes, of course I can. And then went home and had to figure out how to paint in public in front of everybody, my first work. And it's stumbling. If you look at Troubled Souls, you can see as it goes along, you can see me figuring things out, trying to understand how all these mediums work. I was using acrylics, but I was using them like watercolors because I didn't understand how acrylics worked.
Mm-hmm.
I never really thought to bust open a book or anything and read things. I just tried, which was stupid in a way, but hey, I was, stupid. So, I mean, Garth's writing on it. He looks back on it now and he kind of cringes a bit. But I think it's honest and it's true and it's got something to it. My artwork has a sort of brutality and naivety to it that is sort of interesting and enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of the book, I was pretty. I sort of started to grasp painting, and then I had to paint at least another 200 pages for Fleetway after that.
Wow.
And a wee bit for DC as well. And so by the end of all that, I was actually a reasonably good painter, but couldn't stand painting anyway. I just hated the process of it. I was desperate to stop painting comics. I was just like, please stop giving me all this painted work. Somebody just give me some good old black and white pencil and ink for crying out loud. And which finally happened with the Demon, I guess.
Yeah.
I'd done a few. I did a Midden Face McNulty story for DC. He was a ancillary Strontium Dog character.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was meant to paint it. But by that point, I was just so sick of painting that I just sent in the first pages and they were not painted. And I got somebody else to color them. And Fleetway had to accept it. But I don't think they were too happy about that. So, yeah. So that's the upshot of that.
That's an amazing trial by fire. I mean, it's like if you said no, it probably wouldn't happen. So you just had to find answers and you did. But I mean, that's a lot of times people say like the only way to learn how to make comics is just to make comics, and maybe the same idea applies to painting.
Oh, I think so. I think art is just, I mean, there's only so much that somebody can tell you, but really what you've got to do is do.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing that improves your storytelling, figure drawing, general understanding of how things work than sitting and drawing page after page after page, day after day after day.
Yeah.
I get people come up to me at conventions and go, I want to break into comics. So how do you do it? And I say, draw a whole ton of pages, like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the sort of the light go out in their eyes as they realize they're going to actually have to work really hard.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the difference between somebody who really frigging wants to do it, wants to grab comics and run with it,
mm-hmm.
and somebody who kind of wishes they could do it, but really isn't prepared to put the effort in.
Right.
So, yeah.
One thing, because when I was rereading Hitman, so I reread all of Hitman, and then it transitioned to JLA Hitman, which that was like that was a fair distance away from the end of Hitman, if I remember correctly, like several years. Yep. And then reading Dead Rabbit after that, like one thing that really kind of that underlined to me, because I was jumping through John McCrea's career, is like how much your style has changed over the year. Like, what led to those changes? Was a lot of that just like you continuing to figure out what you wanted to do with your art, or was it something larger that was like a conscious choice that you wanted to make a shift in how you approach stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I change my style a lot depending on the genre, I guess, and the sort of style of the story and what I think I need to get over. I always have done. I get bored easily as well, I think. But the honest truth is that not after Hitman, but after Hitman, I drew Hulk Smash and Spider-Man's Tangled Web and Jenny Sparks miniseries, and then I drew the Monarchy, and the Monarchy, which was an Authority spin-off. I mean, I did Jenny Sparks, and then they gave me the Monarchy in the back of that. The Monarchy was a bit of a disaster altogether. Monarchy was a disaster, not only in that nobody really read it, but also a scheduling disaster. Some of it was my fault, and some of it was not. But I did that, and it kind of was a bit of a mess. And then shortly after that, I did another series for DC called, oh yes, it was Superboy, with Jimmy Ciotti writing it, and I love Jimmy, but it was the fag end of the Superboy series. We came on at around issue 90, and it ran for like 10 issues or something, and then they closed it down. So we were kind of scrabbling to try and save it, and obviously we weren't going to. So it was shipping late, and there were a whole host of issues. And by the end of Superboy, I couldn't get any work, basically. I was work free, and scrabbling about looking for work. I worked elsewhere. I did a lot of advertising work, and I spent a couple of years, well, more than a couple of years, in the sort of in the void of no comic work, doing little bits and pieces. I did some stuff for the UK, but a lot of advertising work and various other things. I think my style had kind of fallen out of favor. Also, I'd been about for a while, and you get that thing where there's new people coming through and editors want the shiny new thing.
Right.
So after a while, I kind of realized I needed to do something about this. So I kind of disassembled my style, took it all apart, back to basics, looked around at what interested me in art, not necessarily in comics. I ended up in 1930s magazine illustrators, American magazine illustrators, guys like Flag and Leyendecker and that sort of thing. And I sort of looked at their stuff and took a lot of influence from them and sort of rebuilt my style from there. And I spent a couple of years just working on it, trying to figure out the stuff that I didn't do well, like drawing women. I don't draw women well. I think working with Garth all these years, just drawing blokes sitting around in pubs hasn't helped in that front. So I put a lot of work into that as well. And then I've sort of slowly been clawing my way back into the industry since then, using my new sort of improved version of me, I suppose. And it's been a process. I've done a whole bunch of books with Phil Hester. You mentioned Mythic earlier, but I also did a couple of other things with him. For Image, we did a book called The Atheist, way back before Image became the Image we know now. It was done in conjunction with Desperado Publishing, which was a guy called Joe Pruitt, who I've worked with over the years. Joe used to be at Caliber, and then from there he went on to Desperado, and then Joe is now at, oh Jesus, what's it called? Aftershock. Aftershock. Yeah. Joe's a great guy. He's a lovely guy. I've known him for years, and he's terrific. And he published The Atheist, and I really reckon I'd love for The Atheist to get more airtime. It's a great book. Phil wrote the hell out of it. A really interesting character and a really clever and interesting concept. And I think I did a pretty good job in the old artwork. So it'd be nice if Image would sort of bring it back around again, but they don't have much of a reprint policy. Image, if it's done, it's done, and I can understand that. Look at the amount of stuff they put out. So anyway, I sort of spent a while, and Mythic was another sort of slightly, I thought Mythic was a great book, but it just didn't find its audience for whatever reason. So,
didn't you guys the first issue was like 99 cents or something, wasn't it?
Say that again?
I'm trying to remember the first issue, because I read Mythic, and the first issue was something like $1. If I remember correctly, like you guys went super low on it. We did
issue for I think it had 25 pages, and it was $1 or some stupid price. Yeah, that was to try and get people interested.
Hmm.
And if I suppose maybe it might have worked if I hadn't screwed up the schedule a bit on that as well. That was a big problem with. I'm sorry, Phil. I'm apologizing to Phil Hester right now, but I DC offered me Section 8 at the same time
Hmm.
that was just about to come out, and I really felt I couldn't turn down Section 8 because they were my old characters from Hitman,
Right.
and no, it was. I just really was desperate to. I couldn't. I couldn't believe that DC had offered me Section 8. That we're actually going to publish a Section 8 book. It
Right.
was too mind-boggling. I thought it was an April Fool's joke or something like that. First approached me about it, I was like, yeah, right, okay. I'm getting punked here, aren't I? But as it transpired, they actually were serious about publishing Section 8 book, which even now I find hard to believe, even after it's come out,
Yeah.
especially some of the stuff that was in it as well. But I had to do it alongside Mythic, and both books kind of suffered because of it. And I knew they would, and I begged for leniency on the deadlines and the start dates, but I didn't get it. So I kind of screwed Mythic up. It shipped late on a couple of issues, and these days that's just fatal. So
Hmm.
yeah, sorry, Phil.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a second to talk about my friends over at Ahoy Comics. They're looking to shake up the publishing industry with a bold new format: comic book magazines. What are those? Comic book magazines will feature traditional full-length comic stories plus extra material like prose fiction from Grant Morrison, cartoons from Shannon Wheeler, and more. And Ahoy is debuting in September with 2 titles. First is The Wrong Earth, a 6-issue miniseries from Tom Payer and Jamal Igle about parallel Earths, heroes, and vigilantes and what happens when they trade places. The other is High Heaven, a 5-issue mature readers miniseries from Payer and Greg Scott about a chronic malcontent who dies and goes to heaven, but he still can't help but complain about everything. Look for those in comic shops everywhere this month from Ahoy Comics. And now, back to the show. I do want to talk about Hitman for a bit because, like, I think that what you're saying with All Stars Section 8 when it came out, I remember when it was announced, and I was just like, as a Hitman fan, I was thrilled, but at the same time, I was genuinely shocked because it was this. I think it was part of that DCU thing, and it was all these like youth-oriented books, and then there was All Stars Section 8 in there, and I'm like, this is amazing, but I can't believe this is happening. But I feel like that was kind of Hitman's vibe to a certain degree because, you and Garth put that book together. It's one of my favorite comics ever. I really feel like, Hitman was a truly unique book from DC's history, as it was both like, I mean, it was a super weird book. You could just show a picture of Baytor and you can say that it was a weird book, but it was also like firmly set in the superhero part of the world, so it was kind of scratching your itch. It also had all the war stuff, so it was scratching Garth's itch. But this is like a more like feel-based question, but how often were you like, I wonder if DC is going to let us get away with this with Hitman?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And a lot of the time they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So all that you see is the stuff we got away with.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a whole lot of other stuff that we never did get away with, but we proposed. And it's like, with a horror movie, somebody making a horror movie,
Mm-hmm.
they stick in a whole lot of extra stuff so that when they show it to the board of censors, all the stuff that gets chopped out is the stuff they were hoping that would get chopped out, and the stuff they're left with is what they were hoping the movie would be.
Yeah.
I mean, at least that was the theory. But in all honesty, actually, everything we were sticking in, we hoped would stay. But we knew DC. I mean, for instance, the very first issue where Tommy throws up on Batman,
Mm-hmm.
that whole sequence, and I've told it before, I don't know if you know, but I drew the page in its entirety, and Tommy throws up on Batman, and he throws up on his chest,
Mm-hmm.
and Batman is standing there with the vomit on his chest, with carrots sticking out of it and things, with it dripping off the bat symbol.
Oh my God.
And it was all done. And then the Bat office just went, no, you cannot do this to Batman. This is not respectful of the Bat. You have to censor this. And so we had to crop it and have Tommy throw up on his boots
Mm-hmm.
off panel. We couldn't even show Tommy throwing up on his boots. It just had to be off panel and the reaction shot. Sometimes when people say they had to censor things to, and it actually improves them.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it did. It actually was better with the vomit on Batman's chest. But the Bat Boys really did hate us. And then we did the Catwoman cat signal
Mm-hmm.
and all this sort of business. And eventually, I heard through the grapevine that the Bat Office really was just wished they'd never let us do anything with Batman. Characters, and they wished they'd just stepped in and gone, no, you can't do any of that. I think things have changed now. I think people look back at Hitman and go, it's got its place and its niche, and Batman's in it, but it's what it is, and it's kind of fun and all this sort of business. So, in retrospect, I think DC are happy enough with Hitman, but at the time, the Bat Office really wasn't. There was a Nightwing story planned, and that got banned because of various things that happened to Nightwing and to people around him. So yeah. We tried to do stuff, and we got. But all the same, we got away with so much stuff that I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. I was just going to say that, like, I mean, this is, I've relayed this story like a million times on the podcast because I'm a big fan of Dogwelder, the character. And the funny thing is I don't even really know why I'm such a big fan of Dogwelder. He's just such a unique character that I just can't help but be like, this is amazing that this is a thing. But I mean, like, the fact that Dogwelder exists in, like, DC Comics in a series that actually won an Eisner Award for, like, a conversation between Superman and Tommy, like, there's also a character that welds dogs to people to fight crime, which is astonishing.
It's awesome, isn't it? It is awesome. Dogwelder was the best supporting character 1 year in Wizard magazine, if you remember Wizard magazine.
Oh, I do.
Yes, so so Dogwelder had his fans and does have his fans, and who wouldn't be a fan of Dogwelder? He's a lunatic in a boiler suit who welds dogs to people. It's fantastic, yeah. And honestly, even if I didn't draw it, I would love if DC were to bring back like the Brave and the Bold, those Batman team ups, or like the Superman team up books or what have you, and just have an issue where they just for the hell of it have Batman teaming up with Dogwelder, and you'd see even the Bold Batman and Dogwelder with his own logo, and there they'd be crime. That would be just freaking awesome. I love Dogwelder, and someday if the Hitman TV show ever gets made, which who knows, my sort of I will die happy if the show gets made. Section 8 appear in it. And then they make toys, and then we have, like, you cut to a playground with kids running around playing, and they're pretending to be Dogwelder in the playground, welding dog faces. How awesome would that be? That would be, I would die happy. And at that point, all would be good with the world. So, yeah. We shall see.
I have to say, like, on my reread, I don't know why, but I started getting extremely partial to the Defenestrator, and just the fact that he always has, like, this, like, plate of glass that he can crack over somebody's head or throw somebody through. When I was reading that, I was just like, I don't know why this wasn't more funny to me when I was younger, but the Defenestrator is the best now. He's amazing.
He's just got the big lump of window with the frame on it.
Exactly.
Ripped it out of the wall to do so with. Yeah. We had a lot of fun with those characters, and it was really good fun revisiting, well, some of them for All-Star Section 8. There's spoilers, but of course, half of them died horribly. It is a Garth Ennis comic,
right?
So. Yeah, so that's that really. But the new characters are good too, though of course half of them die horribly as well.
It is, and I feel like it's a central characteristic of Central 8 or Sector 8. Of Section 8 that they would actually die horribly. But do you feel like a particular fondness for them? Because when I was reading interviews with you, it seemed like of the Hitman characters, like in a weird way, you were partial to Section 8 and their weirdness.
Oh God, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I read ordinary superhero comics. I was a Marvel zombie as a kid, but also at the same time, I was reading stuff like 2000 AD. And with 2000 AD and just general, the idea of living in the UK, there's a sort of underdog sort of thing, and a fondness for the weird and the eccentric.
Mm-hmm.
2000 AD's characters are bizarre and crazy and weird, especially if you go into Judge Dredd's universe,
right,
or whatever. And all the supporting characters, they're all really screwed up people, things, whatever. And I guess Section 8 is that in Hitman.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody else is reasonably cool. Tommy's cool, Nat's cool, Ringo, all the supporting cast are pretty cool guys with guns who shoot people and, and smoke cigarettes and walk away from explosions without looking back. So they're all pretty damn cool. And then you've got Section 8 who piss themselves and throw up and, accidentally shoot each other. So yeah, I've got a great fondness for them.
Yeah.
Mainly because if I was a superhero, I'd probably be in Section 8 because I wouldn't be good enough to be anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that's the honest truth. If we all look deep within ourselves, we are members of Section 8.
Oh, yeah.
Most of us. We're not. None of us are ever going to be in the Justice League.
Right.
But we've got a shot at Section 8. That's our dream. It's the reality of our dream. Is that, most of us comic readers, us nerds, will end up being in Section 8.
Have you seen The Incredibles, like the first one?
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah. I always thought if I was a superhero, I would probably be one of the ones that was killed by his own cape, like in that movie. And so I feel like that would be a Section 8 character. So I just have a couple more quick questions about it. One of the things that really stands out about Hitman is it was like the longest book you ever did in your career, I think. And it was also like one of the, I was reading some interviews with you and somebody described Hitman as a quirky book. And I thought that was interesting because I don't think I would use that word. Like there's funny, weird stuff that happens in it, but ultimately it's a very emotional and personal tale for like Tommy throughout the series and everything. So but it is a really well-rounded, and it's a book that I think people, especially now, look back on with fondness. Like you were talking about how Section 8 came back. I feel like part of the reason why it came back is a lot of people who grew up loving Hitman are now in DC editorial. But,
yeah, a bit of that.
But, how, looking back on it, how important for you do you feel like Tommy and his crew were for both you and your career? Can you even quantify that even?
I probably can. I would say it was Tommy. Hitman is a very important part of my career. Like you said, it's the longest thing that I've ever done. It's a good chunk of issues, 5 years of my life, 60 issues plus ancillary bits and bobs. And also, I think, being honest, it's and this is nothing to do with me as the artist on it. It's my favorite thing Garth's ever written.
Mm-hmm.
You've got things like Preacher, which are good, and probably I'm being a bit disingenuous. It's very good, but I find the characters a little unrelatable.
Sure.
Jesse is so cool and so good at everything, and he's so bloody handsome, and he's so this, and Tulip's so gorgeous and so good at shooting people and everything. Even Cassidy is kind of cool as well. Whereas most of the characters, while they are cool, like I said earlier, they all walk away from explosions coolly. They're actually screw ups as well.
Right.
Tommy can't fight his way out of a paper bag. As soon as he has to use his fists, he's crap. Mm-hmm. His love life is bollocks. He's, the only thing he's good at is drinking and shooting people, and he's a bit crap everywhere else. And Nat's a bit hopeless too, really, outside of that arena. They're all quite flawed, extremely flawed characters, and I think I really like them because of that. Mm-hmm. They're much more interesting, really, and I think the sort of overarching story has so many great beats and sort of rises and dips in it and ends so satisfyingly.
Yeah.
That I think for me, it's a better book. Obviously, it's much less known, but I still think out of all Garth's stuff, it's definitely my favorite thing, and that's got nothing to do with the artwork. I just, I'm looking at it purely from a outside spectator's point of view, and I've gone back and read it. I mean, like anything, I look back at my artwork and cringe a bit at certain things. So, and I wouldn't have drawn certain things certain ways if I was doing them now. But as far as Garth's writing goes, I think he really nailed it with Hitman. I think he was really on point for that book. So yeah, I think it's important for me. I mean, anybody who talks to me and knows comics, it's practically the first thing they mention that I've done. 99% of the time. So it's a very important book for me. Yeah.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick break to talk about my friends at Radio vs. the Martians. Mike Gillis and Casey Doran host the Radio vs. the Martians podcast, a show that gathers their funniest, smartest friends once a month for a deep dive into science fiction, video games, horror, comics, movies, and everything in between. So far, they've dissected topics like Superman, Steven Spielberg, Akira, George Lucas, zombies, Twin Peaks, Hayao Miyazaki, James Bond, Watchmen, and whether drivers are required to pull over for the Ghostbusters. Find this podcast and its spin-off show, Podcast La Vista, baby, a celebration of the films of thespian and statesman Arnold Schwarzenegger on iTunes, Stitcher, and RadioVersusTheMartians.com. And now, back to the show. All right, so let's move on to Dead Rabbit, your new Image series with writer Gerry Duggan, colorist Mike Spicer, and more. I'm going to do a little spiel on what it's about for listeners. For listeners that don't know what the book it's about, I want to share the solicit copy really quick. Back in the 90s, Dead Rabbit was a prolific Boston stick-up man and hoodlum until he took down one last big score and disappeared. Nobody ever discovered the truth. He retired to be with the love of his life. Now he's back in the mask to save her, but no one, not his wife, the mafia, or the cops, is happy that he's out of the retirement. I love the first issue. It's excellent. You and Gerry are a great team. I did want to talk about its origins. Like, how did that project first come together? It seems like you and Gerry knew each other a bit. Was it just kind of coming out of that relationship, or what were its origins?
Oh, no. Gerry and I didn't know each other at all.
Oh, okay.
I was reading Gerry's work and a fan of his stuff. And he was at a show in Dublin called the Dice, and it was run by the fabulous people who own the Big Bang comic shop in Dublin. If you're in Dublin and you're buying your comics, buy them from the Big Bang, folks.
Yeah.
That's the advert over. Anyway, Gerry was over for a convention, and I'd been invited to it too. And I thought, I'm going to go and I'm going to schmooze Gerry Duggan and see if we'll get some work together. As it turned out, it was no bother because Gerry was a big fan of my work and was really keen to work with me. So this was 5 years ago, so this is how long it's taken for it all to come to fruition. Mm-hmm. It's taken a good 5 years at least, I think, with Gerry and me chatting. Gerry sent me a whole bunch of different ideas, and Dead Rabbit, honestly, was the one that leapt out at me as the one thing I wanted to do. After drawing Mythic, I think I wanted something a bit more grounded.
Sure.
And just a bit gritty with lots of, sort of thugs and dirty alleyways and nefarious goings-ons. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and just the way Gerry pitched the idea was really. Yeah, I liked the character Martin Dobbs. I really liked him, and I liked the idea of him being in this very strong relationship with this woman, and in fact, it all hinging on that relationship as well. Mm-hmm. And Gerry writes great dialogue and great people, and the sort of the married couple of Martin and Megan, they're just really nice folks, and you're really rooting for them. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. So I think it's a really strong book that Gerry's writing, and I'm just trying to draw the hell out of it so that I can live up to its potential.
Yeah. I think that, one thing that you both are excellent with character work, and I think that that's really shown well in the first issue, and just in the way
Thank you.
that like Martin and Megan like kind of, Megan's like sassing Martin from like the living room as like there's this television report about Dead Rabbit going on, and then he comes out and he's being like, he dotes on her and everything like that, and I feel like you convey that really well in your art and like in showcasing that relationship. And I don't know, I think that that's a good thing, that a good example of how your strengths complement each other. But what is it about working with Gerry that you feel jives well with your own work?
Well, yeah, we have the same sensibilities as well. I mean, Gerry, this is where Gerry feels most comfortable working on sort of crime noir sort of. It is slightly in our future, but only very slightly.
Right.
When society is sort of slightly taken just a little bit of a more of a nosedive, and things are starting to fall apart, and America's whole system is crumbling just a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all things that are very important to Gerry, and I would imagine to anyone really. So he ties all of these sort of things that interest and worry and excite him all together, and has sort of spun them out into this. And I think his passion for all of those things really shines through, and that's what really hooks me on it.
Mm-hmm.
Is just how much you can see he loves writing these characters and this story, and the about the failings of society, certainly in America,
mm-hmm.
and its care system, and it's just the way it treats its workers and people who drop out of the system. How it really is not a first class country at all, but a third world in a lot of ways. It's inequalities are striking and grim, and Gerry really wants to confront those, but not beat you over the head with it. Because first and foremost, it's got to be a good story.
Right.
And so the real crux of it, of course, is our erstwhile criminal,
mm-hmm.
Dead Rabbit, and his shenanigans. And I mean, he's a great character, and I think hopefully people will respond to the way he looks as well. I had fun designing him, and I think he's got quite a striking look at the end of it all.
Yeah, very much so.
So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed the book does all right.
I will say I definitely know that you believe in the look of Dead Rabbit because you dressed as him for the Image Expo announcement. which
first person to cosplay Dead Rabbit.
Yeah.
I wonder if possibly I'm the first person to ever cosplay a character before the comics come out.
No, that is definitely not the case. That is I mean, I don't know. You see some of the stuff on the internet. It's like these books get announced and people are already like showing updates on their character cosplay because they're so into like the idea of it.
Damned right. Curses. You can't win anymore. It was me thinking I was getting in the Guinness Book of Records or something, but nah.
You're definitely the first person to cosplay as their own character before the book was released, though. So that's pretty good.
It counts.
I have to say, like, because I was at that Image Expo, and it was you're sitting there during the announcements, and there's a lot of really great stuff coming out, but like it's important to stand out in something like that, and a really good way to stand out is for one of the creators to dress as the main character. And I was like, as soon as I saw that, I was like smiling and paying way more attention, and it was great. Like I thought it was a really smart move by you guys.
Well, thank you. I mean, it was an idea of a friend of mine. She said, you should cosplay as this character when you go over. And I was like, oh, yeah. And she said, I'll make the costume for you.
Oh, that's awesome.
My friend Lizzie. And she said, I'll make the costume for you, because really all she had to do was make the mask.
Mm-hmm.
And she whipped it together in a day or something like that. And I went out and bought a hat. And I have a suit because, because I'm like posh and all. So, yeah, it wasn't exactly hard to cosplay as. And yeah, I think it did sort of strike it. I got an email from somebody recently who runs a comic shop, or maybe it was a tweet, I can't remember, from somebody who runs a comic shop, and she said that she ordered heavily on it because she was at the expo, and she really enjoyed the fact that a creator had cosplayed as their character, and it showed a real desire for this to succeed. And obviously, they've got a lot of they've invested in it. So it's not, and I will be cosplaying at Thought Bubble this weekend as well. I will be wearing the outfit again. I'm doing a panel at Thought Bubble in Leeds this weekend, and I'll be wearing the outfit. And then I'm in New York Comic Con, and I think I may be wearing the outfit again.
Nice.
As long as this will go terribly wrong when I get arrested or something like that, but up until that point, I'm having fun.
I do think that there's a lot of advantages that you can have for two things. One, it's really easy to cosplay as, because like most of the clothes you might already have. But then in the other regard, it's like the fact that it is easy. It's also just like a good look. It's like, sometimes it's like you see a costume that somebody actually brings to life in cosplay, and you're just like, I don't know about that. But I'm like, you actually look kind of dapper if you're wearing like this suit and you got this mask and everything. It's a good look.
Yeah, well, that's what I was after when I was designing it. I threw a lot more at it, and then sort of took a lot of stuff away until I was left with just a very simple design. I mean, just the axes, the hat, the suit, the gloves, very sleek and simple. And if you silhouette it and just put the X's in, it's very striking. Mm-hmm. So, it was all to do with, making him look cool,
right, and
also making him easy to draw to a degree.
Yeah.
I always think about these things when I'm designing a character. I remember when I was doing the Demon Annual way back before Hitman, and it was where we introduced Hitman, and it was part of the Bloodlines crossover, if you remember that.
I do.
And it had these alien characters in it that were designed by Arthur Adams. Now, Arthur Adams is one of my favorite artists, but he's also a git, because he designed all those characters knowing he wasn't ever going to have to draw more than one. And then all these poor sods had to draw these absolutely ridiculously over-designed creatures over and over and over again. I tell you, I almost tore up all my original artwork that I have of Arthur Adams and threw it away. Happy I didn't. So.
Yeah, good thing you didn't. I just have a few more quick questions. I did want to talk about, how you were talking about how story impacts your style choices overall, because like one thing in terms of the costume and how it like integrates into the overall look, like this is just my Philistine art brain talking, but it feels like a little bit inkier and darker in parts, and part of it is that the first issue takes place heavily at night. But when you got the script, or when you and Gerry were putting it all together, like what direction did like the idea of this and the scripts take you down in terms of the like style you wanted to approach Dead Rabbit with?
Well, you're definitely right that it's inkier and darker. I mean, the story it's a film noir, really. Right. It's a noir story. It's a gangster, and he's rebelling against the system for the woman he loves and all that. And it's really a noir gangster sort of love story. Mm-hmm. So with Mythic, everything was big and bold and open, except in the dark bits, I guess. Mm-hmm. But with this, I'm definitely looking at a much more high contrast art style, lots of big slabs of black, lots of shadows, and light picking out on them. So I have pushed that as much as I can. I've got my Eisner hat on, my Alex Toth hat on. Obviously I can't draw to save my life compared to those two guys, but those are, actually Bernie Wrightson's a fair bit of influence on me as well, on this story. Guys like that, and that's the way I'm thinking with it. Yeah, so you're right. Yeah, it's a lot of inkier, indeed. I like that word, inkier.
I do too. You're working with Mike Spicer on colors. Like, what does he bring to the book? How does he complement your inkier art style?
Well, there's flashback sequences in it where Mike just colors it in flat, sort of monotone gray.
I love those pages. They look really great.
Yeah, it really works well, and it sort of distances it, and also Boston, according to Gerry, Boston, not that I was there, Boston in the 90s was a pretty grim place.
Mm-hmm.
So it really reflects that aspect of it too. But I've worked with Mike on several things, Mythic and a book before that, as far as I recall. And Mike is great. I mean, he just knows what to do and what not to do. And anytime he colors my stuff, he just raises it up. Yeah, and he's not over egging it, because of course this is quite a low key noirish sort of thing. So it's the coloring has to sort of sit back from it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But he does a terrific job. Mike does, and Manny Medeiros, who did the logo. I mean, geez, that logo is one of my favorite logos ever.
Mm-hmm.
He knocked it out of the park with that logo. I love that logo, and I think honestly that logo has done just as much as my character design to sell the book. I think it's just iconic looking little image, the bees of rabbit forming the rabbit's head and everything. It's just cracking. And we've got a great team. Joe Sabino doing the lettering and just bringing a whole load to the table as far as all the sound effects, and just he's doing a terrific job. And so I couldn't be happier with the team we've got.
Mm-hmm.
I just hope that we can keep people's interest up and keep this book rolling along, because Gerry's got a good bunch of years worth of stuff planned out. He's told me about the next arc, which sounds like a hell of a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And featuring a really clever little hook to it that I'm really looking forward to sinking my teeth into further. So it's a fun book. I feel, as far as my art goes, I feel kind of excited and revitalized by it.
Yeah.
And I hope Gerry's feeling the same way about his writing. I've been reading Analog as well, and it's another terrific book by Gerry with David Sullivan on. And I'd recommend that book too. If anybody's listening who hasn't bought that, I'd recommend rushing out your LCS and
So the first time I do want to bring up the first time we meet the titular anti-hero Dead Rabbit, or Martin Dobbs as he's actually named, because I mean it is a notable moment. He's dealing with the world's greatest villain, hemorrhoids, which is a heck of an introduction, but it's also like, I feel like it's a gross and like a perfect introduction, because it fits. Like, I feel like you do a very good job of balancing both like the sincere and the gross incredibly well, because like like Hitman, that's like loaded with all kinds of gross moments, and then there's all these parts where it's just like brilliant character work between these characters who've known each other for forever, these characters who have newer relationships. Just there's like a lot of emotion conveyed in your art. What is it about that tonal split that works really well with you as a storyteller? Is that something you yourself have noticed in your own work, I guess?
I think so, but possibly it's because I sort of the people who respond, the writers who respond to my stuff, like that about my work, and have it in themselves also. So we find each other. And I mean, it's not something I ever set out to be, was somebody who drew the sort of emotional upbeats really well, but counterpointed with sort of in your face gross.
Yeah.
It's not that, it wasn't really what I was setting out to be, but I've sort of become somebody who can do that reasonably well, I think. I think it's just a balance at the end of it. I mean, that intro you're talking about, I had to think quite long and hard about how much I wanted to show, and where to draw the line with it, because it's Image, so I could have gone full on, and shown a whole lot more. But I felt that just the sort of uncomfortableness of the scene was better served by being a little subtle. And it's I mean, as far as an introduction to the character goes, it really sums up the sort of one of the major themes of this book. which is basically the healthcare system in the States, where, poor old Martin is hemorrhoided out the ass, if you'll pardon the expression, and he can't afford to do anything about it. So, maybe he doesn't want to. Maybe, I hear getting hemorrhoids removed is pretty bloody painful in itself. So I don't know. But it's funny in a gross way. And that's what we're after. We're after something where people go, geez, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Like character introduction.
I do think that you came up with a very good solution for it, because there's like a line you could cross where it's just like off-putting, but it's like instead it is funny and it's jarring and it's like impactful, and like that's like the exact sweet spot you want with like a scene like that, which I feel like easily could go wrong.
Oh, I think so. I think so. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you think I've come down on the right side of the fence as far as that goes, and that's very kind of you, David.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've long thought that like the gross and like sincere balance has been like something that was really fascinating. Like when I was rereading Hitman, I guess I don't know why it just didn't impact me the first time as much, but when like the last scene that Baytor is in. And, I guess like spoiler alert for something that came out, I think 18 years ago, he says goodbye, boys. And it's just like him cleaning a glass. And I don't know why. It was like genuinely one of the most emotional moments in the entire series for me. I'm like, Baytor finally says something. He was like, that was something I actually wrote down. I was just like, he was kind of Groot before Groot was Groot. He like owned that corner of just saying, I am my name. And,
you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Screw Groot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Baytor was first.
Yeah, exactly.
Baytor was first. Once again, Hitman plowing new furrows and all that, and sort of setting the scene so that other people can come after us and steal our glory. Why I oughta. Disney, you give me a lot of money. Yeah, right.
I love it. I love it. But John, that's all I have for you. I could talk to you about all this stuff for forever. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about, Hitman, your career, Dead Rabbit, and everything. Best of luck with the book dropping soon.
Thank you very much, David. Appreciate it. Have a good one. All the best.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist John McCrea. You can find him on Twitter @McCreaman and on his website at johnmccrea.com. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support the show, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. You can find the show on social media by liking the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Greg Lockhart, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Sevi, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Paletto, Dylan Campbell, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Michael Garland, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Mike Gillis, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Garino, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McCrea, Ira James Udaskin, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Cole McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Carissa Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track outro from the album Volmilch opens and closes the show. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.